Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 95. We're going to be talking about Halloween Kills, the David Gordon Green film from 2021. Real quick, you can email us at whattthe, at scarythoughts.org. Please do. We love hearing from you. And do we have anything to plug?
I don't.
You know what? This episode will come out before Halloween, hopefully. Halloween 2021, the holiday. And Peaches Christ's haunted attraction, The Terror Vault, Immortal Reckoning, is still happening. I think there are still tickets after Halloween. I think it's running until November 5th or something. So if you're in the Bay Area or you're coming to the Bay Area in early November, I highly recommend that. Chad and I went.
Yeah, it's one of the most fun things you can do in the Bay Area.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. I went twice. I hate to tell you this, but I actually had more fun the time I didn't go with you. I went with a bunch of people. We drank a lot.
That's key.
And I went with Meredith. It was super fun. And people who didn't know each other were like clutching each other and holding each other's hands, wandering through rooms. It was pretty ridiculous.
Was it scarier that time or...
maybe a little.
Because I know the show changes a little bit, which I think is kind of interesting. I kind of wish I had gone another time.
It does. But it's also funnier when everybody's just kind of tipsy-doodle, you know?
Yeah, you should definitely get fucked up before you go see it. And there's a bar connected to it.
There's a lot of bar
so,
connected to it.
Yeah, so you can easily get wasted before you go into it.
Yeah, there's a bar. It's called the Fang Bang. To my mind, it's kind of modeled after Fangtasia, the bar from True Blood.
Yeah, if you were a goth in the 90s in New Orleans, this environment's going to be very familiar to you.
It's so fun.
I can't remember the last time I saw somebody wearing a fishnet shirt in public.
Gorgeous. I guess the only thing else to say before we get into this is spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen Halloween Kills, oh my God, you really have to see it and then go listen to this podcast. I'm totally kidding. You do not need to see this movie to listen to this podcast.
Yeah, we basically spend this whole episode shitting all over it and complaining, and we're not at our best when we do that, but...
I'm going to give this episode a B- in advance.
This episode is for two people. You love Halloween, and you're going to pull your hair out disagreeing with us while you listen to this, and
you're going to hate listen to this.
You'll hate listen to this, and it'll be fun. Or you, like us, think this movie is a fucking steamer and want to just, gab with fellow haters.
There's camaraderie ahead for you.
Yeah, and there's a little story about Fabio at the end, which you might want to stick around for.
It's so good. So where do you want to start with Halloween Kills?
Well, in a franchise that I think is shitty and overrated, this is possibly one of the worst movies in the franchise.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Yeah. I think Halloween itself is completely not great.
You mean the first one?
Yeah, just Halloween. Like the first one I don't think is anything special. I think probably people's love for it is like very similar to people's love for Star Wars. You just saw it at a certain time in your life, and it was kind of the only game in town.
Well, then I would argue that the word special is not the word you maybe want to use, because it is special, and Star Wars is special. I think Star Wars is stupid, but I know it's special. Halloween is special. It completely changed the direction of horror movies.
Yeah, well, we'll just say this. The first one...
But are you saying it's just not that great?
Yeah, it's just not that great. Like, and I think just on its merits, it's not that great. And can it be not great and be a cultural phenomenon? Sure. Look at Meg the Stallion. But I would say that the vast majorities of the films in this franchise are fucking terrible. And the previous film, this reboot, was all right, and it was kind of interesting because it's sort of it changes one of the main characters. Like, it makes Laurie Strode sort of a different version of Laurie Strode, and that's kind of interesting. It gives her Terminator 2 moment. But this movie falls off so hard from that this isn't even one of the better shitty Halloweens. Like, there are other Halloweens from the shitty times that are better than this one.
Yeah, I think that something that this movie does that is interesting is that because the cinematography is generally better, the pacing is more competent than a lot of the sort of main, like, let's not talk about the Rob Zombie era, but all of the previous Halloween movies. Generally speaking, they're clunky, they're low budget, the acting is bad. Like they just generally things that we look to cinema to do adeptly, to consider it good filmmaking. None of those films really do have. The first one has, I think, a lot to it, especially considering how and when it was made.
It has a feel and a vibe that
sure.
I think, like, I would probably have. I think you could make a case that I've unfairly dismissed it with that, but I would say its feel and vibe is the best thing about it.
Yeah, but I think that Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills, because they are well shot, well lit, the sound is all done well, like the filmmaking competency is extra high. They get name actors who are delivering performances above the level of the screenplay, and it gives this film a mystique that it has leveled up from the rest of the Halloween franchise, and it has not.
Yeah, I mean, but I would say that this is like a farm-to-table restaurant and an airport is what this is. Like, yeah, they got some grass-fed beef, but it still fucking sucks.
Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, I can see that. It sort of takes a step towards this thing, this elevated horror bullshit. It takes a step towards that without dragging along a better screenplay with it. The screenplay's still pretty hacky.
It doesn't make any sense. It's like thoroughly illogical in places and not in a fun way. That's the other thing. This movie takes itself so seriously.
Yes.
Like
it doesn't have the fun, at least it's lacking the fun of a lot of like Friday the 13th, Halloween franchise movies.
And it uses the fun that it does have in a really cynical way. Like it's trying, anytime there's a fun element, it's introduced to try to be like this short form method of getting you to care about the people who are about to be killed. Like, so all the interesting, fun dialogue, a dialogue that's not like 40 years ago, evil dies tonight, like, which is 80% of this movie. Anything else, like the back and forth between the roommates.
The gay couple, Big John and Little John or whatever.
I thought they're more like a Bert and Ernie sort of situation.
That's so cute.
I was actually thinking about was like in this day and age, like, look, if you ask me like to place a bet, are they a gay couple? Sure, right? But it's sort of a little bit like that movie in Heathers when they have like the double murder suicide, and it's like, oh, they have the artifacts of gayness around them that sort of.
Was it Perrier?
Yeah, it's Perrier, Men's Magazine, like all this stuff. It's like, they're never explicitly gay. So are you in this day and age fucked up for assuming that? Like, is it like incorrect to assume that they're gay? That's why I'm just going with it being kind of a Bert and Ernie situation.
We'll follow your lead on this one.
I mean, they're clearly gay, but they're the most fun characters in this movie. And like the reason why they're fun is because they get killed. And it's funny because like in the old way of doing this, like anyone having sex would be, have sex, then die. Now it's like have fun, then die, which is very much on trend for these ages. You mean like
the fun of being an interracial couple and having a drone?
Yeah, you're just goofing around with
the
product of late stage capitalism,
Yeah. Yeah. I sort of feel like that is one thing that this movie and Halloween 2018 does that I do kind of like, is there's sort of these Rosencrantz and Guildenstern characters that like you just get a little sliver of them and then they are dispatched. And then you get a little sliver of these other people. They're having a moderately witty dialogue and then they get killed.
Yeah.
I kind of like that just ever so slightly more than a friend wandered off from the party. Just these completely unrelated people that you get a slice of.
Yeah, that's the best writing in this movie are those little exchanges with people. And, the thing with the kids and the couple and like, do you know whose house this is? And I guess, but then like Michael Myers is so not fun. Like I've seen people talk about in an admiringly way, oh, his kills are so brutal. They're direct. They're just like not that interesting. The most interesting thing that happens is like he stabs like 9 knives into the one guy, which doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense, but it was great. It was a cool scene. I also love, I can't picture it now. A woman has a gun, something gets launched at her and she ends up shooting herself in the head. Do you remember this?
Oh, I can't remember. Is it in the car? Is it when they're all in the car?
Fuck. I don't remember.
There's so much that there's so many.
I'm sorry, listeners. This movie just isn't as memorable as I wish it was.
And part of it, because it's a mess, it's not memorable because it's like there's so many unimportant characters that have equal screen time that are like throwbacks because they're extras from, this is like the Expendables of horror movie extras.
Yeah. Well, I think it also reflects earlier Halloween movies in terms of quality of screenwriting again and direction, in that the thing with shitty slasher movies that makes them very mockable is the sort of like, don't go up the stairs, don't say I'll be right back, don't go off on your own, don't look around our corners. Like the things that no sane human would do, people do in slasher movies. Like someone's out there killing someone and then everybody makes bad decisions and gets themselves killed and it's their own fault because they're being dumbasses. The characters in this movie, just because they're good actors, doesn't mean they are not making those exact same stupid decisions. Like there's a crazy killer in town and the gay couple are like, let's split up and just wander around the house and see what that noise could have been. Like characters are constantly putting themselves in harm's way for no reason other than to move the script forward and to get killed. And that's shitty screenplay writing that a movie that looks and sounds and moves like this one shouldn't be doing. It shouldn't be, I don't know, I feel like it's such a letdown because these movies could have been this big step up for the franchise, for taking this idea of this, unstoppable killing machine that's dark and we don't understand and everybody's got their theories and there's this legacy and it's just clumsy and nothing makes any sense. And it's such a letdown.
Yeah. I mean, just even the way Michael Myers is handled across the two movies, I think is kind of a letdown because he's on rails enough to where people can make decisions in the story about like what he's going to do or not do. Like, so it's not like an unknowable cosmic horror, or even like, I think in the last time we talked about the new Halloween from 2018, I made a comparison to Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. That is an unknowable, unstoppable killing machine that is extremely interesting. And you don't know anything about him, but he has a code. And you can sort of understand his code if you're familiar with like films of violence or stories of violence. But like Michael Myers doesn't make any sense. And I think like the most undermining thing that happens in these two films, and I complained about it in the last film, is him not stabbing the baby in the cradle. I think if he had simply stabbed the fucking baby, his like brutal, unstoppable movement would have made a lot more sense. You would just buy it more. Like, because you could make a case like, oh, he's like this element. Like, that this is one of the most nihilistic movies you can watch. Like, basically everything fails. The police department fails. Psychology fails. The prison industrial complex fails. Rugged individualism fails. Small town community fails. Nothing stands up to this force. And that would be kind of interesting if he truly was this blank slate demonic force of nature, but he's kind of not. Yeah.
I think that also in the construction of Michael Myers, as you know, I hate sort of going, what they should have done is, I don't like approaching art that way at all. But something that I thought was interesting about the first one is they took this franchise where Michael Myers is pretty supernatural. Not as much as Jason Voorhees, or certainly not as much as Freddy Krueger, but there's a supernatural cannot be killed.
Right.
There's a difference between like unstoppable and literally cosmically unstoppable.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciated about Halloween 2018 is that, he's just kind of relentless. He's not supernatural.
Right.
He's just very determined and very relentless. And we can joke that he's this 60-year-old guy who's spent 9/10 of his life behind bars, and this is unrealistic, but he's just this guy.
He could have been doing burpees the whole time.
I think he probably was doing a lot of burpees or a lot of Tai Chi, deadly Tai Chi. And the first half of this movie, like, okay, we're still in this world where this, he got out of that basement. That's really unlikely and silly, but he got out of the basement and killed a bunch of firefighters. And then someone stabs him with a pitchfork and he survives. And I feel like that really broke a potentially interesting thing that could have happened, where at the very end, they all beat the shit out of him. Nobody shoots him. Or does anybody shoot him?
Yeah, a few people shoot him, but
not in the head.
No, there's never like a headshot.
And then he gets up and it's suddenly, okay, he's supernatural. He literally cannot be killed. He is literally unstoppable. But we already saw that earlier in the movie when he took a pitchfork through his chest cavity.
Yeah.
So if they just didn't do that, if they just let him be relentless, him raising from the dead would have been more shocking. But we already saw him basically be unable to be killed.
Yeah, they kind of like let the cat out of the bag early.
Right.
Yeah, and then what I was thinking about just now is like for most of The Witch, you don't really know if there's something supernatural afoot. Right. And that's what's kind of interesting.
Yes.
Like, even they talked about the scene where the little kid has the apple in his mouth.
Yep.
It's small enough to have been in his mouth or throat.
Yeah.
And at the very end, when there is a supernatural reveal, it's cooler.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh shit, it's the devil.
Yeah.
And I think this movie could have easily had something like that happen. But it's just fucking whack, man. I don't think I don't know why it's whack. Like who involved in this made it whack. I know you would probably pin it on Danny McBride, and I don't disagree, despite being a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just looking for excuses to blame him for more things that I don't like.
It also has like probably the most ponderous and embarrassing element of this film is the mob violence thing.
It's so hammy.
Yeah, it's so hammy because if you're trying to use mob violence in this way with this chanting, and you can do all kinds of things with it, and like Jamie Lee Curtis had this really. Red Letter Media pointed out like how embarrassing her comparison of this with the Black Lives Matter movement were, because you're hurts. Are you saying that movement was wrong, or you or somebody who would maybe compare it to the January 6th rubes? What side does this film come down on mob violence? It basically says,
is this against cancel culture? Is that how we're being contemporary?
Yeah.
Like mob justice is a fool's errand? Like, what do you...
Yeah, it's like, what are you saying? What is it saying about mob? And it doesn't need to say anything, right? Like, but Hollywood
mobs suck. You can leave it there.
Yeah, like you could just say, like, this is just a dangerous element run amok. Like, for example, at the end of Joker, there's just a mob, and it causes problems, and it makes it harder. You could have simply had the mob running amok, just getting in the way of the police, allowing Michael Myers to kind of like sneak around and do crazy shit. But instead, you have them chasing after this like other escapee. And what's so fucking weird about the subplot of the other prison escapee is it like she goes to try and save him. This motherfucker was locked up with Mike Myers and escaped from a prison bus and did not want to be recaptured. You think he's fucking cool? Like he's probably some sort of like cat raping child molester,
I don't know. But I would say my bigger problem with that whole detour is that this town seems to be consumed by the mythology of Michael Myers. Mm-hmm. This guy killed 3 babysitters back in the 70s, and this town seems to be obsessed with the evil that has been hovering over this town for decades, and not a single person in that town knows what Michael Myers' face looks like.
Yeah.
They just see some random dude, and like, there he is.
I mean,
and they chase him off the roof of a building. Like, this small town that's obsessed with Michael Myers doesn't have any clue what the guy looks like.
Yeah,
that wouldn't happen.
Like if Scott Peterson got out of jail here, the guy that killed his wife and baby.
Yeah,
people in the Bay Area would be able to spot that motherfucker.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, like you're just like, what? This is so silly and stupid.
Yeah,
and it's just a bummer because it's like. You just think about how much money gets spent on making some piece of shit like this. It's just sort of offensive.
Well, going back to how this movie was trying to be topical, or they were trying to, in retrospect, trying to make it topical. Apparently the third part of the trilogy is going to be sort of like COVID.
Oh my God.
Reflective.
I mean, these people should not
Why?
These people cannot be trusted with events. Like Hollywood just has to make some fucking stupid bloviated moral virtue signaling. I hate to use like such a loaded term, but it's virtue signaling. It really is. Like, it's like, oh, it's kind of like shitting on small towns. Like, small towns don't know what's best for them, or they can't handle their own shit. And this small town certainly can't handle its own shit.
No, not a single person in this town knows how to operate a firearm correctly.
In the 2018 episode of our show, we prosecuted the firearm handling of this film. I think more than enough that we don't need to rehash it here.
That's fair.
But it's, essentially it comes down to that the director and probably the writers of this film just simply do not know how firearms work. And there actually is a scene that bothered me enough to where I could say it. Like, there's the moment where like one of the dads goes and is like basically handing guns out from his tackle box. And somebody asks him, "Are these legal?" He's like, "Some of them are." There's literally nothing in there that you couldn't buy. Right? Like, or like, are these registered? It's like, I don't think where they're at, you would have to register handgun. That's like a California and Massachusetts thing, in New York. But it's just like the idea that like the guns that he was handing out, they're like kind of similar to the Halloween 2018 guns, and they're not tactical, they're because they don't want to like glorify guns or whatever. Right. But it's like, you would want to have wild looking shit. Like, kind of like Tremors. In Tremors, there's the character who's like the gun nut, and you sort of make a better commentary about his fucking insanity by letting his guns be super like Schwarzenegger insane. And these guys are just taking out like a Beretta 92 and like just stuff that you would buy like at a police auction or something like that. But it's so highlighted, and he's just handing guns out to random people. No one who like would have that many guns in the real world would just be handing guns out unsafely to people. It would be fucking insane. Like, I wouldn't trust anyone who had never handled a gun to have a gun, because that person is going to shoot somebody they shouldn't.
Which is part of the plot of this movie.
Yeah,
somebody
exactly.
shot someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The police ineptitude, I can kind of get behind in this movie. That's like the one thing that you have these like Barney Fifes that just can't handle business. That tracks a little bit. But have you ever read First Blood? Or seen Rambo, the first Rambo movie?
Oh, I mean, when it came on cable when I was a kid, I watched it so many times.
So First Blood is a little bit like Rocky. I mean, obviously Sylvester Stallone's in both of them, but in that it's not the same movie that you remember. In the way that like the first Saw is not the same movie that you remember. Like the First Blood is the book. I just read the book. It's a great thriller, and it's basically Rambo is like a horror movie character, in that he's this guy who is trained by the government. He's like the top Green Beret, and he's been through an insane amount of shit in Vietnam, and he's basically a drifter during the time of hippies. So like, people don't want hippies coming through their town doing all their LSD or whatever.
Yeah.
And the sheriff of this small town wants to keep the small town nice, and he's also a war hero. And you have Rambo and this hero sheriff are kind of on the same vibe. And the book is very different than the movie, because it goes the chapters go back and forth between their two perspectives, and you have like a reason for Rambo to be doing what he does, and he kills like 80 people in this town. He blows up half the town. He's kind of a monster, but he's pushed to that. And like, I think that's like what's missing from Michael Myers, is that there's not a reason. Like, even Jason Voorhees has the story of the camp counselors were fucking and he died, and therefore, and this is the reason why I mention all this Rambo nonsense is it's why I think Rob Zombie's Halloweens are better than any of these other Halloweens, is because they give Michael Myers a reason to be Michael Myers.
It's funny you should put it that way, because so much of the argument against Rob Zombie's Halloween movies it reminds me of, I brought this up before, but the Patton Oswalt thing about, I don't care how the thing I like was made, I just want the thing I like. I don't care how Anakin Skywalker became Anakin Skywalker. I just want to see Darth Vader.
I think he's so wrong about this. And I think that the reason why
Hollywood's like, oh, you like this thing? Let's completely like dredge through how it got to be that way, because you idiots love nostalgia. So we're just going to like dig into the backstory. We're going to do the prequel because we know you'll eat up a prequel. Like, no, actually, maybe we don't want to know why this thing is the way it is.
Well, I think a monster either needs to be totally unknowable, insane, and insane, like the xenomorph and Alien, or you need some sort of reason. Or the creature or monster has to be so singularly weird that it doesn't need that stuff. Like,
And are you saying that Michael Myers is none of those?
I think he's none of those. I think it's just a slasher. And then as soon as he becomes like an unstoppable supernatural slasher, it's like, how do you come back from Jason 10? You know what I mean? Where they blow him up and shoot him into space. And that's
totally.
how, I mean, it's just like that. It's like, that's the logical conclusion of an unstoppable Mike Myers.
Well, at some point you put, what more can you do with a car racing movie? Well, like, when will it be in space? Now it's been in space. It's kind of done. Mm-hmm. You can't top that. And it seems that Michael Myers, you can't top it. All you can do is roll it back and make it more realistic. But then they've broken that as well. Mm-hmm. Did that make sense?
Yeah, like, I mean, definitely that, like, getting it back to its roots is always a move, which is a nostalgic move, which it should be, you know, it's like salvaged denim and pomade. You know, it should be looked on with some mistrust.
Well, I mean, speaking of the Red Letter Media guys, the one thing that I really appreciated about their estimation of this film is, I think it was Jay's complaint about how every nostalgic detail is just sort of milked. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I can really frame exactly what he was saying very well, but it was this criticism of nostalgia cinema that was very critical of how up its own ass it is. Mm-hmm. All of the callbacks, there's so many callbacks in this movie to other parts of the franchise. Same with Halloween 2018.
Yeah.
And all the nerds love that shit. But there's a degree to which callbacks are one thing, nostalgia is one thing, but then there's this thing that this movie and Halloween 2018 are doing where it's almost totally self-important. Like, it can't see past its own ability to be clever with its references to mm-hmm. itself. It's navel-gazy, it's self-obsessed, it's not unlike the strategy of Saturday morning cartoons selling action figures to sell Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
It's not making an interesting art. It's not elaborating an interesting universe. It is merely self-aggrandizement. And it is a strategy that is getting really tired and totally lacking in imagination. And it's a shame that this movie spends so much energy doing that.
Yeah, it's like ordering the least bad thing off of Caviar for like the fourth time in a month. It's just, you're just kind of like, ugh, I guess.
Sure.
You know, and the thing that's like, I think so disappointing about this sort of thing is like, you know, like I'm glad you brought the Red Letter Media guys back again, because I was thinking about, like, you know, I'm just doing what I've complained about in the past, which is complaining about a thing that I had no part in making, and, you know, this isn't really for me, and you know, what do all these complaining nerds have to say or do anyway? You know, like, I've been like sneering at some of the commentary over the new Dune movie, which I loved, right? Like these like fucking uninformed retards, like, shitting on this thing that I really like, which is exactly what I'm doing right now.
You're like, talking to one right now.
Yeah. And so I think in order, you know, I think if anything, our show is sort of self-aware, but horror is sort of self-aware. And I don't know how you work at Blumhouse and make this movie. Like, you have the example of, like, the example of a referential horror movie, which is Scream. I'm sure everybody who made this movie saw Scream, except for probably Jamie Lee Curtis, who probably doesn't watch anything that came out after 1986.
Why do you assume that?
She just doesn't seem like a real fan. You know, like, when in interviews, like, some people seem paycheck actors and some people feel like fans.
Right.
Like in that latest Chucky movie, like, Aubrey Plaza seems like she might have watched some Chucky movies and enjoyed them. I can't imagine that Jamie Lee Curtis has ever watched any Halloween movie, probably even including the ones that she's been in. She's not even in scenes with Michael Myers in this movie.
It's so weird.
It's super weird. I mean, it's like,
she is in a hospital bed for almost the whole movie, which, you know, okay, whatever, fine, but
that just reeks of contractual obligation to me. You're like, I'll be on set and I get to lay down the whole fucking time.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Like, I'm not getting out from behind this desk. I'll be in your movie, but I'm just going to sit at this desk and I'm going to eat off this desk during breaks.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's unfair to her, whatever. I mean, who cares? She's rich and famous. Like, imagine if you had like a council of nerds of like the red letter media guys, like real people who like have like opinions about this stuff. Do you think that they would be able to like improve these movies or not? Like if you had like 10 people sitting down and giving like real fan notes instead of like studio notes. Like, cause coming over here, I listened to part of Rob Zombie's interview with Joe Rogan where he talks about the studio meddling with Halloween.
Yeah.
And how basically the notes that he would get for movies would basically be elements of whatever had been number one at the box office that week, that they would be like, oh, and he talked about like not Halloween, but another movie he had worked on, like 1 week. Private Parts was the biggest movie. And they're like, do you think we could get Howard Stern for this bit part? Like that was like one of the notes.
Holy shit.
And he had predicted that would be the note, which I think is hilarious. But I feel like movies like this get ruined by Suits. And that's a story that gets told over and over again.
Sure.
What if you replace the Suits with like real fans? And I don't mean like the mob on the internet. I mean like people who were like immersed in this stuff.
I don't know, because then you've got a writer's room and you're replacing a producer who may or may not have any business making decisions about a creative product with a council.
But they can get the food truck to show up on time and know where to rent the camera cranes.
Sure.
So
I mean, I think it's baked into cinema that movies cost a certain amount of money to make. Filmmakers generally do not have that money or won't put up the money themselves. So you need a producer, and that producer will meddle.
yeah.
But doing something by council isn't necessarily better. Because
yeah.
that's, I mean, different kind of mob, but we are talking about mobs.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are some writers' rooms that have obviously created incredible magic in television, let's say. And it's at such this opposite scale end to something like the idea of the auteur. Just like let one person just do their fucking thing and stay out of their way, and you're going to get magic. And I think that...
Well, that's clearly not what this is.
Totally. Yeah. But I think there's no rules. There's no... It seems just so fucking random what makes a good movie.
Yeah.
Or makes a satisfying movie.
And then I've been thinking a lot lately about just like, are movies even worth watching just as a thing? Because there's such... In general, there's way more bad movies than good movies. And I mean, there's a lot of good movies, but like,
It's the same as everything, though.
It's like, the same as everything.
It's like a restaurant. Like most of them suck and they're going to fail. But that has to happen. That's the nature of capitalism.
But it's just the way movies are made seem like it's so hard to make a true vision.
Oh yeah.
With the way movies are made. I mean, you just think about like just the stuff that slips through, like David Lynch's Elephant Man exists because Mel Brooks knew enough to leave him alone. And he was like, I have this script that I like. I fucking loved Eraserhead. I want you to make this movie. And it was like, Mel Brooks is like the opposite of the type of producers we're talking about here.
Yeah.
He's like the greatest producer ever.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but like he produced some fucking great movies. Like The Fly, amazing. When I was thinking about all these criticisms, and I was like, I've been softening lately with all this meditation and shit. So I was like, oh, do I really want to just come in and shit all over this movie? And I ended up doing that because this movie is awful. But so like, I'm not stopping these kind of movies from getting made. Like if I just wasted all of our time just now, I think probably.
You're speaking truth to power, Chad. It's always important.
Man, like what are we trying to accomplish here? Like we can't stop the third movie in this series being made.
I'll watch it. I hope it's great.
Oh, how could it be?
That is a mystery I'm willing to gamble on.
And that's the thing is, it's like, how lame are we to like put up with that? You know what I mean? It'd be like if we went to a restaurant, it was okay. And the next time we went to the restaurant, it was fucking awful. And then we're like, you know what? Let's see how it goes next time we go. Like, it just doesn't make any, we accept it with movies.
I would put it differently. I would say there's a new Indian restaurant in town. I like Indian food. First time, Second time, terrible. You know what? I like Indian food enough. I'm willing to give this place one more shot.
Indian food is literally the only food that I would tolerate that from. My favorite type of Indian food is not the fanciest and not the shittiest. I like the mid-level, like sort of like, there might be napkins that are folded.
Right. Yeah.
And that's like what Blumhouse is as a thing.
Well, I think Blumhouse is a great example of this ocean of mediocre content with these outliers poking through every so often.
Yeah.
And the question is, does it need to create all of this superfluous content to make it possible to make the ones that are good or not?
I mean, that's how the record industry worked for a really long time.
It's true.
This could be simply a product of economics. Like this is, I mean, because imagine like a radically different system where movies were made, where like you had all art was made by like merit, and a country like spent a bunch of money, and like you could go through primary school to college and on into your career, and you didn't have to worry about money. You could just make excellent things, and the only people who could make movies were the people who had made the most excellent other things. Like, do you think that would produce more great movies? I mean, I'm talking like something radically weird, like not even like how I'm describing it. Like,
Yeah.
like, do you think that a totally different system would produce the same level of shit? Or I guess look at like the way Canada rocks their movies and music. That's mostly shit, and they kind of pay for half of it, right?
Kinda.
Yeah.
This reminds me of, what's his name? Is his name Chang, the Momofuku guy?
Oh, David Chang.
David Chang.
Yeah.
So he has a new TV show out on some network or other. And I only watched the first show, and it was about automation in the food industry. And he spoke to a really interesting concern about all this automation that's taking place, which is his dad was an immigrant who started as a dishwasher and worked his way up and became quite high up in restaurant culture, but started literally at the bottom.
Yeah.
And when you automate all the entry-level processes, there is no entry level.
Right.
And his concern is, first of all, for all those jobs lost, of course, but also what will it do to food culture and restaurants and the creativity of restaurants when there is no entry level? There's no one coming in at the bottom. There's no process by which you can have no skills and develop skills in the industry and rise up. And I think that is worth questioning in any industry. And I think maybe what you're describing, it brings up that problem, is that I think it's necessary for so many filmmakers to try things out that may only get 4 stars on IMDb to keep the machine moving. Everybody gets employed. Everybody gets to see what they're made of. Also, not everybody needs to be watching something that's an 8 on IMDb. There's something for everybody. And there's also a place for so many people to participate in the collective thing of filmmaking and, and specifically horror cinema. Like there's an infinity of horror movies that come out every day.
It's crazy that there's an entire...
I am interested in almost none of them.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Like you would think that, do you have Shudder?
I do.
I have no interest in having Shudder. Like, I mean, we host a like pretty well regarded, if not well, like large audience,
if not podcast. The best.
Yeah, clearly the best horror podcast. Well, if you were listening this deeply, you probably think that, right? Like, I mean, like
if you got this far,
yeah. We spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, and I grew up with it. I have like expensive editions of all kinds of horror shit, but I don't have Shudder.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care to have it. I don't give a fuck about those movies. Like I don't know. I mean, that probably says more about me than it does like the whole ecosystem of horror. But I imagine there's other people like me out there,
Well, I'll speak for myself, but I think I'm maybe partly speaking for you, is that part of what draws me to horror is that it is a vehicle, a very good vehicle, when it's at its best, for ideas and as an art form to address political, social, philosophical ideas. And I think you and I are not necessarily invested in horror as a genre in and of itself, where it's interesting talking about this slasher movie. Slasher movies are a phenomenon that a lot of people are fans of that thing. And they may or may not be self-aware about what draws them to it. Everybody, when they're into something like, I'm into vintage cars because of this, this, and this. But it's like, that's maybe just a story. We all give ourselves a narrative to explain away why we are the way we are. But I think that people who are like really into slashers, they could just as easily be into Beanie Babies or something like that. It's just a thing to focus one's energy on, and that's
I
fine.
think it's better to be like that. Like, for example, like I probably like action movies more than I like horror movies. Like even a mid-tier movie like Extraction. But I don't feel like addressing those movies philosophically like we do this.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I think it allows, because that part of my brain isn't turned on when I'm watching that stuff, I like those movies more. And I think that probably most horror fans are approaching horror like that. And I think it's probably a better way to go.
I think you and I are the types of people who are burdened by being too critical of things to just enjoy a lot of the world just with an open heart. So I love horror movies, but I think I like them for reasons that make my relationship to them complicated instead of just being like, I love slasher movies. If it's a slasher, I'm for it. And I'm really well versed in it rather than like, well, if we talk about slasher films, it can really open up discussions of subjectivity in the Reagan era, you know.
See, I kind of like got infected with that at Berkeley probably, but like what I really like about horror is I'm really attracted to the dark side of theology, and it really mostly shows up in horror movies. Like if you're going to get a demon or like a dark god or something like that, it's going to be in horror, and that kind of personally interests me because I like the idea of a demon haunted world. Like I think that's interesting. I think the idea of like old Scratch waking you at 3 a.m. to test you is interesting. Like, you know, I'm so into the idea of Kali as a goddess that I would be borderline considered a devotee. I mean, even in like the Mexican cartel worship of Santa Muerta, like that stuff absolutely fascinates me. Yeah. And the closest you get to it in like mainstream culture is like probably horror movies.
Yeah, that's fair. So what did you like about this movie?
I think that some of the action sequences with Michael Myers when he's like actually doing some killing, I think those movements and the brutality of it is really interesting and cool. And I think if this movie had been flattened out and showcased those elements, almost like this is just like Michael Myers is John Wick and he's going on a killing spree, this movie could have been fucking great.
I mean, could you imagine if this movie was faked, but if this movie was, quote, one take, it was just like, it starts with Michael Myers in the basement and you just kind of follow him around for 2 hours.
Yeah, what was that World War I movie that just came out, like 1917 or something like that? Or maybe it was 1918.
Dunkirk?
No, not Dunkirk. It was the one that was like a single take. It wasn't really a single take, but it was like, it never left the POV.
Was it 1912 or...
19-something. It was a World War I.
19-something. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, it was amazing. But like, it's a movie that was very visually interesting to watch the first time. And then I watched it again with a friend. I was like, okay, this is boring as fuck. And then it becomes really obvious where the cuts are. So it's like a magic trick. The first time you watch it, you're like sort of, whoa. And then the next time you're like, oh, I see where the cards are. Like it becomes less interesting. And it's not as, I don't want to say it's not character driven, but the gimmick is the thing. Right. You know, like more so than the character. Whereas in Dunkirk, there's more of a character element, even though there's like time slip trickery going on with that movie. But yeah, I think a really fun Halloween would be a Michael Myers single take murder spree where everything was super brutal and you just get it down to like its absolute most interesting elements, which is simply just the killing.
And if that movie happened and there was like 10 minutes of him just walking through backyards or something like that, I would be more than happy to watch that. That is more interesting to me and more tension building than a bunch of crappy dialogue and yelling "Evil dies tonight," you know?
Yeah, like all the stuff that somebody probably thought was really amazing. Like I bet somebody probably wrote down "Evil dies tonight" in a notebook in like an LA cafe and was like, "I'm a fucking genius."
Nailed it.
You know, and then I bet like everybody who worked in this movie probably had all kinds of fucking funny things to say about it, like evil flies tonight, like when they're gonna go catch a flight or something. I'm sure it became like a jokey thing on the set.
I know people talk smack about the "Evil dies tonight" thing. I actually don't mind it so much. I know it's a refrain. Look, I am totally okay with this movie that's about mob mentality having people just repeat an inane catchphrase to keep themselves motivated. I totally get it. I think it's easy to make fun of because we live in this world where if you
Where
can
people
repeat a
actually
thing,
do that.
fair enough. But I think it's also something like, oh, we didn't like this movie and we can point at this anomaly. It's a weird thing in the movie that a lot of people repeat the same line. What's wrong with people repeating the same line?
Well,
Like a bunch of people like who are like determined to kill, chanting the same thing over and over. That makes sense to me. I totally get it. I think I'm putting it in the plus column.
well, think about another thriller horror type thing that has mob insanity, The Purge.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't need that. It's just goofy. It's just like a slogan. Like, it just feels like somebody was like, oh, we need something to put on these t-shirts when we sell them later.
Yeah.
And then this movie is just like, I feel like the only thing that will last from this movie is like all these people will now be able to charge $30 instead of $20 when you pose with them at a horror convention.
Shit.
That's such a weird thing. I would never pay money to take a picture with somebody fucking ever.
I bet there's somebody.
There's nobody I would pay.
Who would you want a photo with and how long would you be willing to wait in line?
I don't feel like I would degrade myself by waiting in line to see it's anybody.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like you're just immediately saying, like, I'm the subservient, uncool thing. Like, just my natural, like, anti-hierarchical. And no matter how much I love somebody's work or something like that, I don't think I would stand in line simply to be recognized
Yeah.
by the. Maybe I would stand in line to get a book signed, but only because the value of the book would increase afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a difference between paying money to see someone do their art, like perform live or something like that, versus for you to participate in the advancement of their celebrity status.
Yeah.
Which is very weird to me.
I mean, another thing that I hadn't considered, but I think is probably what I would say would be a cool thing about this whole like sub-celebrity photo thing is it's kind of a nice way of like keeping these people employed. It's like tipping
That's
these people.
absolutely true.
You know, like
Absolutely
I
true.
could see like I would maybe, if the line wasn't too long, pay $20 to take a picture with Linnea Quigley because I know that she would because I know she would spend that money on like rescuing dogs. Like,
Totally.
so it would be like an interesting way of me supporting a dog charity.
I don't know, when I think about this, I just try to take a page from the Book of Monique, which is her, I don't wait in lines and I don't pay for drinks.
Yeah, I don't do either of those things. Mainly because I don't drink or go to bars or leave my house, really. But, you know, there are things that I've paid. Like, I paid money, like an extra $60 to go to like a Higan Machado seminar at 10th Planet. You know, like he's like this legendary black belt in jiu-jitsu. And the shit he showed was so fucking far beyond my ability to pull off that it was actually just a waste of money for me.
Right.
But it was really, I mean, it felt cool to be able to be in that guy's presence and kind of learn something from him. Like I could see, like, I would go pay to learn things from people.
Yeah, well, sure,
but I wouldn't
of
pay
course.
to stand there. Like I would be pretty stoked to go like spend a day shooting with Tim Kennedy or something like that.
What about, would you agree for your friends to spend money sending you cameos from interesting people?
If they were hilarious, 100%.
Yeah, there's some good ones.
Like the one, who was it that got the one from Rachel Dolezal?
a friend of mine, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so
It
good.
was so fucking funny.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like that whole taking a picture. Like we have, I mean, there's people that are connected to us on Instagram that I look at their feed and there's, you know, pictures with them and Sid Haig or like and they kind of seem to go around and take pictures of hanging out with people. Like, I guess it's cool. Like it's just not for me. What about just taking a picture with a random, like if you met somebody in the street and wanted to take a picture, who would you want to take a picture with? Or would you?
Wait, you mean
This is a little bit different.
So
Like instead of you're not waiting in line.
just like,
you're
oh my God, it's so
you're
and
at
so.
the- you're
I want
at
to.
the bar.
I'm gonna go. Hey, can I get a photo with you?
Yeah.
Nobody. I would never interrupt somebody in their life.
I don't mean
photo.
interrupt. Like they were at the bar. Like they came up to the
Were we
bar.
already talking?
You were already talking.
Like they walked up and were like, "Oh, I like your shoes."
You
And I'm
would
like,
be
"Hey,
sad
cool."
that you hadn't gotten a picture with them because your interaction had been good.
I don't know, man. I'm not trying to be holier, but I just don't think in those terms. I I rarely try to capture moments with a camera.
For me, it would for sure be Bert Kreischer. Because I think that's his whole deal. You know what I mean? Just because that would be fun.
Or Dave Attell. Like if Dave Attell came into my fucking bar.
Yeah. If he came into your bar.
If I was working and Dave Attell came in, I would be like, hey, Dave, everybody in the bar drinks for free if you pour the drinks, you know? Like your whole entourage can drink for free if I can get a photo of you serving me a drink.
It would be cool. I would like to get a picture with Josh Barnett. Would be pretty cool.
Who's that?
He's a UFC fighter. He's like a heavy metal guy. He's like people who like our show probably like him if they like any UFC fighter. He's also kind of like a pro wrestler type character.
Okay.
He would be cool. Hulk Hogan, maybe. Yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger for sure. Yeah. I met Fabio and didn't get a picture with him, and I kind of regret.
That's too bad.
Because his thing is kind of getting pictures with it. Like that's kind of baked into the vibe of him. I remember years ago listening to an interview with him on Howard Stern, and Howard Stern was kind of like introing him. He said, look, every woman in this building said that Fabio was cheesy and sucks and they would never be interested. And when he came in, he fucking wets panties. Like people lose their fucking mind. And he was hawking a protein powder, or like a grass-fed milk, like a protein shake at Whole Foods when I was working there. And so it was a big deal. Like, you know, Fabio's coming to Whole Foods, the corporate office, and, you know, and it's just a bunch of salty old hippies and, you know, like, you know, dog rescuing lesbians and stuff like that. Like the women are just kind of crunchy at Whole Foods and in a really great way, like just a really fun people to be around and just great. And they're all like, fuck this guy, you know, like, you know, also, you know, like who cares? He comes in, he's enormous. Like he's a giant man. He's still jacked. He looks great. His hair is fabulous. And he comes in and you could see, it was like a unicorn came in. Like people lost their fucking minds. And then he, well before our, you know, generalized broad critique of toxic masculinity, was picking men up and posing in romantic pictures with them. Like, no problem. Not a big deal. Didn't give a fuck, right? And so there's a whole... You can go online right now and look up, like, Fabio pics of him, like, romantically holding guys, girls, whatever. And people in the office were taking those photos with him. And I do not have a photo. And it's a fucking huge regret of mine.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So, yeah.
All right.
That's it.
What have we learned?
We learned to not watch Blumhouse movies anymore. At least I did.
Diminishing returns.
Yeah.
You know what? I have hope for Blumhouse. Hopefully it's not over. I really hope and believe that there are good Blumhouse movies in the future.
Maybe.
Is that it?
That's it. I mean...
I am so sorry, dear listeners, that this one was so very... I feel like it was very negative, but also kind of low energy because you and I were just so not even fired up angry at it. We're just kind of
disappointed
in it, which like, doesn't... Yeah.
Let's watch something we'll really hate next time.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'd rather just watch... I typically don't like to shit on stuff like this. I think I'd rather be like
I agree.
Amazed by something.
Well, it seems despite the genre disparity, a lot of people requested we cover Dune.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, should we do that? Is that actually... Should we cover Dune?
I will come down and say I like the David Lynch version better.
You're not the only one.
Yeah.
All right. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. And thanks for listening.
Yeah. Fabio, if you're listening, you're the greatest.